Welcome. This is Signal. The Descendant by H.P. Lovecraft. In London there is a man who screams when the church bells ring. He lives alone with his streaked cat in Gray's Inn, and people call him harmlessly mad. His room is filled with books of the tamest, most puerile kind, and hour after hour he tries to lose himself in their feeble pages. All he seeks from life is not to think. For some reason, thought is very horrible to him, and anything that stirs the imagination he flees as a plague. He is very thin and gray and wrinkled, and there are those who declare that he is not nearly as old as he looks. Fear has its grisly claws upon him, and a sound will make him start with staring eyes and a sweat-beaded forehead. Friends and companions he shuns, for he wishes to answer no questions. Those who once knew him as a scholar, an aesthete, say it is very pitiful to see him now. He dropped them all years ago, and no one feels sure whether he left the country or merely sank from sight in some hidden byway. It is a decade now since he moved into Gray's Inn, and of where he had been, he would say nothing till the night young Williams brought the Necronomicon. Williams was a dreamer, and only 23, and when he moved into the ancient house, he felt a strangeness and a breath of cosmic wind about the gray, wizened man in the next room. He forced his friendship where old friends dared not force theirs, and marveled at the fright that sat upon this gaunt, haggard watcher and listener. For that the man always watched and listened, no one could doubt. He watched and listened with his mind more than his eyes and ears, and strove every moment to drown something in his ceaseless pouring of gay, insipid novels. When the church bells rang, he would stop his ears and scream, and the gray cat that dwelt with him would howl in unison, till the last peal died reverberating away. But try as Williams would, he could not make his neighbors speak of anything profound or hidden. The old man would not live up to his aspect and manner, and would feign a smile and a light tone, and prattle feverishly and frantically of cheerful trifles, his voice every moment rising and thickening, until at last it would split in a piping and incoherent falsetto. That his learning was deep and thorough, his most trivial remarks made abundantly clear, and Williams was not surprised to hear that he had been to Harrow and Oxford. Later, it developed that he was none other than Lord Northam, of whose ancient hereditary castle on the Yorkshire coast so many odd things were told. But when Williams tried to talk of the castle, and of its reputed Roman origin, he refused to admit that there was anything unusual about it. He even tittered shrilly when the subject of supposed undercrypts, hewn out of solid crag that frowns on the North Sea, was brought up. So matters went, till the night that Williams brought home the infamous Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred. He had known of the dreaded volume since his 16th year, when his dawning love of the bizarre had led him to ask queer questions of a bent old bookseller on Canto Street, and he had always wondered why men paled when they spoke of it. The bookseller told him that only 5 copies were known to have survived the shocked edicts of priests and lawgivers against it, and all of these were locked up with frightened care by the custodians, who had ventured to begin a reading of the hateful black letter. But now, at last, he had not only found an accessible copy, but had made it his own at a ludicrously low figure. It was at a shop in the squalid precincts of Clare Market, where he had often bought strange things before, and he almost fancied that the gnarled old Levite smiled amidst the tangles of beard as the great discovery was made. The bulky leather cover with brass clasp had been so prominently visible, and the price so absurdly slight. The one glimpse he had had of the title was enough to send him into transports, and some of the diagrams set in the vague Latin text excited the tensest, most disquieting recollections in his brain. He felt it was highly necessary to get the ponderous thing home and begin deciphering it, and bore out of the shop with such precipitate haste that the old Jew chuckled disturbingly behind him. But when at last it was safe in his room, he found the combination of black letter and debased idiom too much for his powers as a linguist, and reluctantly called on his strange, frightened friend for help with the twisted, medieval Latin. Lord Northam was simpering inanities at his streaked cat, and started violently when the young man entered. When he saw the volume, he shuddered wildly and fainted altogether when Williams uttered the title. It was when he regained his senses that he told his story. He told his fantastic figment of madness in frantic whispers, lest his friend not be quick to burn the accursed book and give wide scattering to its ashes. There must, Lord Northam whispered, have been something wrong at the start, but it never would have come to a head had he not explored too far. He was the 19th Baron of a line whose beginnings went uncomfortably far back into the past. Unbelievably far, if vague tradition could be heeded, for there were family tales of a descendant of pre-Saxon times when a certain Gnaeus Gabinius Capito, military tribune in the 3rd Augustine Legion, then stationed in Librum in Roman Britain, had been summarily expelled from his command for participating in certain rites unconnected to any known religion. Gabinius had, the rumor ran, come upon a cliffside cavern where strange folk met together and made the elder sign in the dark. Strange folk whom the Britons knew not save in fear, and who were the last to survive from the great land in the west that had sunk, leaving only islands, with raths and circles and shrines, of which Stonehenge was the greatest. There was no certainty, of course, in the legend that Gabinius had built the impregnable fortress over the forbidden cave, and founded a line which the Pict and Saxon, Dane and Norman were powerless to obliterate, or in the tacit assumption that from this line sprang a bold companion and lieutenant of the Black Prince, whom Edward III created Baron of Northam. These things are not certain, yet they are often told, and in truth, the stonework of Northam Keep did look alarmingly like the masonry of Hadrian's Wall. As a child, Lord Northam had peculiar dreams when sleeping the older parts of the castle. He had acquired a constant habit of looking back through his memory for half amorphous scenes and patterns and impressions from which formed no part of his waking experience. He became a dreamer who found life tame and unsatisfying, a searcher for strange realms and relationships once familiar, yet lying nowhere in the visible regions of Earth. Filled with a feeling that our tangible world is an atom in the fabric of vast and ominous, and that unknown domains pass on and permeate the sphere of the known at every point, Northam in youth and in manhood, drained in turn the fonts of former religion and occult mystery. Nowhere, however, could he find ease or content, and as he grew older, the staleness and limitations of life became more and more maddening to him. During the 90s, he dabbled in Satanism, and at all times he devoured avidly any doctrine or theory which seemed to promise escape from those close vistas of science and the dully unvarying laws of nature. Books like Ignatius Donnelly's chimerical account of Atlantis he absorbed with zest, and a dozen obscure precursors of Charles Fort enthralled him with their vagaries. He would travel leagues to follow up a furtive village tale of an abnormal wonder, and once went to the desert of Arabi to see a nameless city of faint report which no man has ever beheld. There rose within him a tantalizing faith that somewhere an easy gate existed, which, if found, would admit him freely to those outer deeps whose echoes rattled so dimly in the back of his memory. It might be in the visible world, and yet it might be only his mind and soul. Perhaps he held within his own half-explored brain the cryptic link which would awaken him to elder and future lives in forgotten dimensions, which would bind him to the stars and to the infinities and eternities beyond them.